Happy Monday, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Business is Blumin podcast. As always, we've got an awesome guest with an awesome story. We have Deborah. Deborah, how you doing today?
Hi, I'm great, Daniel. Thanks for having me on.
Sure, and thank you for taking the time to come on. So, a ton of fun stuff to get into. Just to give everyone a brief synopsis, Deborah's actually has a great real estate story, and we're going to get into a ton of real estate investing topics for all of those interested in real estate. But just to get started a bit, Deborah, can you just speak a little bit about your background story?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been an entrepreneur for about 30 years right now. I mean, basically, I worked for a company a little bit out of college, and then I went straight into owning my own business. And I've had several different businesses. And about 13 years ago, I'm just going to call it an opportunity to start over. Like, I think there's a lot of people who've had those kind of opportunities. Sometimes it's the death of a loved one. Sometimes it's a divorce. Sometimes it's, health reasons. I was in a car accident, and it was an SUV that my friend was driving, and the tire blew, and she lost control of the car, and the car flipped driver's side first. So I got the impact of the flip, and I was actually air vac to a hospital because I had a pretty bad head wound, and they told me I had broken my neck. So it was really the beginning of like over a year-long healing journey for me. And during that time, I had a lot of time to think.
Mhm.
And I thought, am I really living my life the way I want to live it? And I didn't have a bad life, don't get me wrong, but I think what I had done is I had started businesses and really made myself a job. I
Mhm.
was the owner operator. I was doing everything in the business and coordinating everything. And I didn't want to live that way. I knew that. I wanted passive income. I
Mhm.
wanted to travel the world. I wanted to have systems in place. And I wasn't living that way. And I knew that was going to be, I knew I wanted to change something because of that. And after the doctor signed off on me, I started my journey of changing that. I started Googling passive income, honestly. I mean, like, it was like, how do you get that? Right? I hear tell people have that, there's all this conversation around, oh yeah, living your best life and you have income flowing in, but I didn't know how to do it. So I Googled passive income, and a lot of things come up, royalties comes up, but real estate kept coming up. And I was like, well, I need to get me some. And so I started educating. And I started educating both in real estate as well in personal development, because I knew that I had some habits, I'll just say, that were, typical of an owner operator. And I knew I needed to change my mindset too. And so my brother, who helped take care of me during that time that I was down, had just gone through a bunch of Tony Robbins stuff. And so he was like, well, if you're really serious about this, maybe you should, go to Tony Robbins. And so I did. And for those of you that don't know, Tony Robbins is a high performance coach, author. He's a huge name in the self-development industry. And I went to one of his events and I started drinking the Kool-Aid. Like I went to all of his events and really started on a journey about changing my mindset. And that journey that education, along with some real estate education, led me to a completely different path where I am living financially free. I am living with cash flow. Oh my gosh. And so it's been a pretty interesting journey from there. So, but that's kind of my background in a nutshell.
Got it. Appreciate the background there. Cash is king, so it's always great to have cash flow. Definitely get into a lot more of that kind of questions surrounding that and your life changed. But a quick follow on regarding that. So you said prior to your dip into real estate, you had the mindset of an owner operator. How would you say that the mindset of like an operator differs from someone who's just kind of collecting passive income or seeks those kind of investments?
Sure. I think that for most entrepreneurs that get into business, their business is their baby.
Yeah.
Like we nurture it, we cuddle it, we coddle it. But the truth is that I was still maintaining a position of being the center focus of it, right? If things didn't happen by me, they didn't happen,
Mhm.
And it was really apparent when I was down. I was sick. I couldn't do things,
Mhm.
and so my income stopped flowing,
Mhm.
and I think that I had to learn more about teamwork. I had
Mhm.
to learn more about putting systems in place. I had to learn more about operating, making things operate so that I can remove myself and it can continue going. And
Mhm.
that's really all about systems. I feel like prior to my real estate experience, I was kind of a lone wolf. Like I made all the decisions in my businesses. I had a few different businesses. One of them was a software company, and we sold a piece of software, so that was successful. I had another business that failed. I had another business that was a boutique design firm. So I had several different businesses, but they all required my immediate daily attention,
Mhm.
right? And so learning how to not be the lone wolf, learning how to develop systems to be in place so that I could remove myself a little bit and they could continue to maintain themselves was a
Mhm.
real mind shift as well as a skill set to learn.
Got it. It's very interesting because I think one of the things you pointed out, when you're an entrepreneur, you tend to nurture and kind of do everything you can to grow your so-called metaphorical baby.
Yeah.
Essentially, over time, as let's just say you're really efficient at doing what you do, once you get used to it, it's still tough because you still have to be there. But long term, the best way to grow a business isn't to be an operator, but almost to kind of teach decision making and implement trust within your team. And I think a lot of times that trust is what's hard for a lot of operators to implement within their businesses. So, obviously, you're a good case in point and a great example. But I do think that it is something that a lot of business owners over time, if they really want to scale, have to do because you can't do everything you sell yourself. A lot of these bigger companies have huge and large teams, and they're big corporations for a reason. So I definitely resonate with your point there that a lot of it's about building trust, and I think that was a great way of summarizing it on your end.
Yeah, I think it's not only about building, it is about building trust and having people that are investing in your vision,
Mhm.
right? So that they want to, contribute to and make it better, right? But it's also about hiring A players. And I'll be honest with you, because I am a coach and because I believe in coaching, I'm always coached. And I'll never forget kind of a turning point when a coach was like, "Well, are you hiring A players?" And I was
Mhm.
like, no, I'm a scrappy little business. We don't hire A players. We hire who can afford. You know what I mean? And I was like, wow, when I hired that first A player, that A player brought in more and more value to the company and more to the bottom line than I would have ever thought. But that was like a risk, like it's a growth process that you have to take to kind of go, oh, I see how this works now. And you have to be clear about what you want your outcomes to be. I mean, you have to have a lot of conversation on that. And what is that saying?
It's like
Hire slow, fire fast. Hard to do, but yeah, you have to do that. So
definitely. Well, quality doesn't come cheap, and that's can definitely
yeah.
resonate with that point. But a quick follow-on regarding that, when you're interviewing, when you're looking to hire more A players, is there any way to tell between the people that just kind of want to be there for like a regular job versus the people that really, 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 really want to do it?
Yeah, I think that's about finding out how invested they are in the vision of the company,
Mhm.
you know, and how much are they just doing this for a paycheck, or are they just doing this because there's something about the company or the culture that you're developing that they want to be involved with,
Got
right? So it makes a difference. I mean, even if their goal, like some of the people that have worked for me, their goal is to learn from me so that they can go on and do real estate the way I do real estate, right? Well, okay, that's a great goal. I know that I've got their attention. I know that they're committed, you know, and willing to, work through whatever challenges that we have together as a team.
Got it. So really kind of an interview question maybe for someone who's looking to hire those A players is how invested someone is, not just the paycheck, but in the vision of the company, because that's when you know they'll be there for the long
Well,
run.
if they're given the opportunity to hear about the culture, right? Like you have to be able to vocalize your vision and your culture and what it is you're going towards.
Okay. I think that's awesome. I think that's a great viewpoint, especially when you're hiring. So, I'm happy that you were able to make that jump. Speaking of jumps, another jump that you made, the big thing we'll get into is kind of your real estate business and the involvement you had there. So, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about your background, how you had this event in your life and ultimately got you thinking about passive income. How would you say more specifically you got started in real estate? Like, other than kind of Googling it, what was the first tangible step where you were like, okay, this is the property, this is how I'm going to approach it?
Yeah, well, I was real clear that I didn't know anything, right? Like I was like, okay, I had Googled this, and then I was like, okay, I got to learn about this. So, first of all, education, and because I was in the Robbins realm, one of his ideologies is that if you want to be successful at something and you want to be successful quicker, then you need to surround yourself with those that are doing it and are successful at it, right? And if you can, partner with those people, because that's the way you're going to get you're going to get a quick education on how to do it right, right?
Mhm.
So I had to find those people, and there's all kinds of real estate clubs in people's backyards and people's hometowns. So that's where I started. Podcasts. Hello, thank you, Daniel, for starting a podcast. Podcasts are an excellent way. Books, podcasts, real estate clubs. That's really where I started. And I mean, I started like walking in and not understanding the terminology they were using, right? Because it's a whole different language,
Mhm.
and then going home or making notes and then Googling afterwards a lot of the words that I didn't understand, and or just asking. I didn't pride myself on knowing anything. So I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Can you explain that to me in more layman terms? And that's where I started, and then I started focusing on, somebody told me that I needed to get an investment philosophy.
Mhm.
And I was raised blue collar. My parents, I'm first generation American. Like, I was taught in my household, keep your head down, work hard, never taught an investment philosophy. And I was like, what the heck is that? And they were like, look, you've got to make a plan on how you're going to get to where you're going to go. And so I really thought about that for a long time, because if you remember, like what I really wanted was passive income, but what I had was nothing really. I hadn't worked for a year. I'd blown through a bunch of savings. I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have any money really, like to buy something, right? Like I was like, okay, how am I going to get passive income? So I realized I had a real interest and want to learn how to flip property, rehab property, buy distressed houses, put some force equity into them, and then sell them for a profit. And I thought if I could do that, then I could get the profits and I could start buying rental properties and get passive income. So my first investment philosophy was that, like active income to passive income, flipping to cash flow. And I did that for quite some time. But that was my journey. Like, it probably took me, I don't know, a year just to even get that far.
Look, Deborah, definitely kudos to you because there's a lot of people out there that can probably write a book full of excuses that they made in their life. I'm tired. Oh, I don't know anything. I don't know this. I think there's a beautiful quote by I forget if it's Albert Einstein. It might be. So no one quote me on this. No pun intended. But it's like every expert was a beginner at some point. So really, it's never too late to start. So definitely applaud you for doing that. Quick follow into that. You said you were able to kind of pursue a lot of education regarding real estate, and you mentioned books. Are there any specific real estate books you'd recommend for anyone trying to get involved in real estate investing?
Yeah, there's one, and I don't actually think that it's published anymore, so you'd have to find it on Amazon used, but it's called Equity Happens.
Mhm.
And it's a really great book that was written, and it just really talks about the process of real estate. Real estate isn't a fast cash kind of thing. Even real estate transactions. This is hard asset, right? This is a piece of property. This is dirt. You know, it's not a quick, like, you're not like at a stock market where you can buy it, buy and sell on a daily basis. It takes a process to buy. It takes a process to sell. So it was all about equity and how you gain equity in a market. It was a great book for me. There's a ton of great books out there, though.
Got it. Awesome. Really appreciate that. Definitely include that subscription. So so thank you for the suggestion there. One of the things that you mentioned was in the beginning you were focused on really locating properties and determining how to go about investing in them and pursuing that path. So I'd love to know how you went about or what your method was for locating your initial investment properties.
Well, like I said, I came up with this thought that I was going to flip a property first, so and then transition to buy and hold. So those two processes were different. So I can touch on both of them if you want me to. But I realized, like, the market was good in California at that time for picking up distressed properties. And first of all, I had to learn to run the numbers on how to do that. Like how much I could afford to pay, how to estimate the rehab costs, how to estimate the cost of sale, so that I could end up with a profit afterwards. So I had to learn how to do that, and then it took me quite some time to get that first property going, and I think it was because there were so many unknowns to me at the time. At the time, I think the loans for regular mortgages were at about 3%, and I was looking at hard money lenders, which was a new concept to me, that there's these lenders that lend for short term for flipping purposes. They lend for flipping purposes. And I think that they were at 12% at the time. And I seriously thought, what is this, the mafia? Like, what am I doing business with? But the fact, yeah. But the fact of the matter is, if you factor the numbers in, you can't, a lot of long-term loans, you have to hold the property at least 3 to 5 years, and I knew I was only going to be holding the property 6 months to flip. And the next thing I started doing is looking around for a mentor. So, like I was taught, you want to learn something fast, you get taught by somebody who's doing it and can help you be successful at it. So I hired a mentor on my first project, and he walked me through my entire first project. We came out with a profit at the end, but he really showed me and held my hand through those processes I didn't know. And during that time, I gained confidence, which is really important, like to be able to gain the confidence of, like, oh, now I understand how it works, and, figure out how to do it. So, yeah.
Awesome. I really appreciate your discussion. I think, something we'll get into later is kind of the role of mentors and mentorship. But, it's a great example in how far you've come. You also had someone in the beginning when you weren't as familiar with a lot of these terms, and I'm sure the process that is kind of making money in real estate. You had someone who was able to help you out. So definitely a beautiful thing there. And we'll get into the whole flipping versus holding kind of a conversation or method of investing for sure. But kind of sticking with when you were initially investing, I know a lot of the things that you did was like rehabbing and kind of marketing properties. I'd love to know your approach and how you were able to kind of fix properties up and ultimately market them to kind of make the flip eventually.
Yeah. I feel like luckily I'm one of those people that doesn't pretend to know anything. So it's really helped me along the way. When I look at purchasing a property and the neighborhood that I'm purchasing in and what I need to do to the property, I really examine those neighborhoods and go, all right, what are the best properties of that neighborhood? What do they look like? What are the people of that neighborhood buying? Right? Because not all neighborhoods are created equal, right? And you want to make that the best product in that neighborhood. You want to make the worst, house on that street the best house on that street, And how do you do that in a certain amount of budget, so that people get what they want, right? So that you're actually serving the community and the housing market by putting something on the market that people want, and as well as, like, being able to stay within the budget that you've allowed for, right? So you have to make decisions when it comes down to what type of flooring, what type of what type of tile work, what type of kitchen you want. And I think that I run into some newbie rehabbers that are trying to do something that suits their tastes.
But not.
And I've just never I've never taken on that ideology. I'm not designing to my own taste. I'm designing to that market's taste, that neighborhood's taste. What that market dictates. And I think that's always made it easier for me on the sell end. So I think that's one of the lessons I've learned.
Got it. Would you say a lot of it is kind of in the beginning? Because, when you're rehabbing a property, there's probably a zillion different things to consider. Is a lot of it just kind of making decisions, and then for the ones that don't work out, learning why they didn't work out and then pivoting to kind of a better choice in the future?
It is. It is. And I think that's why it scares so many people.
Mhm.
I think that, but I'll be honest with you, I think entrepreneurship is that.
For sure.
Like as an entrepreneur, you need to consider yourself an excellent problem solver, because that's what you're doing all day. I jokingly tell people my phone doesn't ring unless there's a problem on the other end. There is nobody calling me telling me everything's going great. That just doesn't happen. So and I think with rehabbing in particular, and I think that, like, I have friends that are real estate investors, and that some of them hate it because the rehab portion of it is you could open a wall and find a mess of problems that you had no idea or you did not plan for, and that's part of rehabbing, and I know a lot of people don't like that, or, find that to be, but I figure out, like, there's always a way. And if I don't know the way, there's always somebody that knows a way. So, that's kind of my ideology when it comes to that.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. I think, entrepreneurship boils down to a lot of things, and not to get into all the technical aspects, but I think high level it is ultimately just about being able to solve problems quickly and, making a choice if it's not right, knowing why it's not right, and then making a better choice next time. So definitely
Yeah,
resonates.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's
Yeah,
definitely not a straight path.
a lot of trial and error and figuring stuff out. But no, really interesting to hear about that. And I'm sure something a lot of real estate folks or kind of people just getting started in real estate, something that they deal with. So it's definitely great to hear about your experience and how you're able to kind of learn a lot of lessons, to put it lightly. So that's
Yeah.
great to hear. Speaking of lessons, one of the things that you've definitely had to do a lot of in your career is negotiating, especially when selling these properties. How would you say you were able to improve your negotiating skills over time, or kind of what role did that play when you were ultimately pursuing these deals?
Well, I think that I learned early on, for me, negotiating is not an adversarial situation. It's a situation where you're trying to solve a problem again, right? Whoever you're negotiating with has an issue, whether it is they want money, whether it is they need time in the particular house, whether it is they, you know, why it is they're selling this house. Like, what are their pain points, and it's been really different along the way in my experience. Some people's pain points, one situation comes to mind where it was a woman who had inherited her father's house, and he was a collector, he was a bit of a hoarder, and it was just too much for her to go through all that stuff, and she wanted to sell the house in that situation. So it's like figuring out how it would best work so that she still got maximum value and got a fair price out of the house, as well as whoever I ended up buying the house at that point, so that I could, and then I had enough, equity in it that I could clean it up and get a price out of that house too, right? So it's like it's working alongside and figuring out what the pain is and figuring out how you could solve the problem, right? I feel like, at least in my situation, that's a lot of what the negotiation is about.
Got it. Okay, so instead of just kind of instead of trying to sell a house or sell a property flat out, which obviously is the ultimate goal here, really understanding what a buyer, or kind of what they're looking for, understanding their pain points, and being able to kind of alleviate them in any way you can. Would that be
Right.
accurate?
And then on the other end, like on the selling end, like once the house is great, I mean, then it's a whole different set of issues, like you never know if somebody's coming into the house and purchasing the house as a second property, or if they're purchasing this house and they need to move right away, or if they need to move in a few months, and figuring out that flexibility and figuring out what's best, what would serve everybody best.
Got it, for sure. I think on a quick tangent regarding hoarding, not to get too away from the conversation, but I actually lived in New York for a few years, and there was a resident on the first floor of the apartment building who was, let's just say, everyone in the building knew she was a hoarder. And ultimately, one day, there happened to be, during my tenure there was actually a building fire that started somehow from her apartment. So if there's any hoarders out there, no shame in that, but just please be safe. Definitely I want to avoid a situation like that. But speaking of which, these are common issues people deal with, and I feel like to relate it back to the conversation, this is just something that instead of being angry about that it's a situation, just kind of accepting it and going about figuring it out. So definitely look up to you for that.
Yeah.
But great to hear about that. The other thing that you mentioned earlier was initially you got into kind of flipping, and then you got into holding. So I know a little bit about your strategy is kind of flipping in neighborhoods where certain neighborhoods flipping houses, and in certain emerging neighborhoods maybe holding and then trying to kind of get positive cash flow or sell it off in the future. So I know that's a loaded way of saying it, but my question is, how do you look at an apartment or a property and decide whether this is going to be something you flip right away or hold for a bit and then maybe sell eventually?
So that actually happened in a weird way for me. I'm in the greater Los Angeles area, and so rehabbing here was great. Los Angeles is a very high equity place, so even packing more equity into a property was wonderful. And initially, I thought that I would buy my cash flowing properties here. Because I think as an investor, you think, oh, I want to be able to touch and feel it. I want to be able to drive by it, right? Like there's a feeling, right? But the fact of the matter is that LA properties really don't cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
They're really too expensive for people to like turn around and make them into rentals and cash flow them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, when I learned that, I was like, well, what am I going to do now? And I remember I was at, like I said, I went to all these real estate clubs. I was meeting all these other investors, and I was with a group of investors. And I remember one guy had investments out of the city. He was in a different state. He had investments that were in a different state. And then one guy had investments, but that were in a different country. And I remember driving home that night after meeting them and thinking, how do they do that? Like, to me, that was just tons of risk, like to be so far away from your properties. And I thought, you know what? They've somehow figured out a way to mitigate the risk.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, and risk is a personal thing. What's risky to me might not be risky to you, Daniel, right? Like everybody's got a different risk tolerance, but I needed to figure out mine. And I needed to figure out how to mitigate what felt really risky to me. And what felt really risky to me was buying a property outside of California somewhere, right? That even though you heard what I wanted was cash flow, that was my outcome. So I needed to get my outcome, and I'm like, all right, I've got to figure out a way around this. So what I did is I educated, right? So now I'm setting off on a different education, and I'm educating myself on the highest cash flowing cities in the States. And then I'm visiting them, because for me to mitigate that risk, it was education and team. I wanted to feel like I had a team in that area that I could trust. And I needed to learn how to manage a team, that from a distance, whole different thing, right? Managing a team from a distance. I ended up I ended up deciding on Memphis, Tennessee, as it was ranked very high in cash flowing for properties for investors. And I went there and I saw it, and I could get in at a relatively low price point, and I could still cash flow things. And so I was studying it, and once again that took like a year. Like just that process. But I'll tell you an interesting story. There was a guy, like I told you, I went to all these real estate clubs. There was a guy at one of the real estate clubs, and he like kind of pinpointed me, and he was an investor, and he'd been investing for a long time. And he said, Deborah, I've watched you talk about cash flowing properties for almost a year now. When are you going to have that first cash flow check in your hand? And I was like, you want a date? And he's like, I want a date. and I was like, okay, I'm almost there. I'm really close, And then I calculated it and I gave him a date like 4 months out. And you know what? The date didn't matter to him, but the date mattered to me. And I actually made that date. And it was just it was just a mindset, I'm going to say, right? I hadn't gained the confidence that I understood the process to know how to do it. But once I did it, I was like, oh, that wasn't as hard as I thought it was. And I bought 3 more that year, right? Like it took me a year and a half to get into the first one. And then it just flowed along because I'd started gaining the confidence and I'd started understanding the process more. And I started, having faith that I could actually, do that. And so it became something that I did. So it's been a process, but once again, it was, it was a journey.
But definitely relating back to entrepreneurship, I think that's a lot of things because I think say the first time you do something, it could take you as just an example, it could take you a year, but then you do it again and it takes you 6 months, and slowly but surely, you get to the point where you're doing this in like a few weeks or a month, and you're like, wow, like I'm doing the same amount of productivity, but because every time I improved something, I did it much quicker. So definitely,
Right. I mean, your confidence gains, and then the next thing you know, you're able to do it on a regular basis, and it's not taking that stress from you that first one did, right?
sure, it's definitely an incredible journey. Quick follow on to one of the things you said. Do you have any international real estate right now, or just domestic?
No, I have domestic. The farthest I'm reaching right now is Puerto Rico, which is a territory, right? It's on the U.S. dollar, but it's kind of different the way it runs. And yeah, I just opened a bed and breakfast there. In fact, 2 months ago, we have a 16-unit bed and breakfast that's just open. So yeah, my experience, I mean, we're talking about the beginning of my journey, but since then, I turned my flipping experience into development, and I've developed here in LA, and then I've turned single family units into multifamily. So I have multifamilies in Arizona and Texas. Like, it's been a journey.
Definitely. Well, one, best of luck with the bed and breakfast in Puerto Rico. I know there's great weather there, so hoping for only the best out of that property. And the one note I was going to add, I know, real estate is hard enough, but international real estate is probably a whole other beast because you're dealing with constant regulation difficulties, maybe political instability. So definitely maybe something that's possible, but probably something much more difficult to deal with than doing domestic stuff.
It's so funny because I get asked that a lot, and it's true that some of the processes are different, but some of the processes are different from state to state.
Mhm.
And then, people say some of the culture is different. And I'm like, some of the culture is different from state to state too. I was flipping here in California. I run things pretty quickly here. When I went to Tennessee, when I was first in Memphis, I was buying turnkey properties, but then I started buying foreclosures that didn't require, I mean, they required some rehab, but not moving walls and that kind of thing. And so I was putting together teams in Memphis. And the team in Memphis was just, we'll get there, Miss Deborah. Just a little, like they have a different time
Maybe not.
thing. Yeah, so it's different everywhere. That's the long and short of it. And learning to adapt is part of it.
The way you say that, learning to adapt. I think that's especially real estate. Great to hear this on that. Another thing that you touched upon or discussed earlier were some of the struggles you had as just someone getting into it. And really appreciate kind of you discussing some of the things that you had trouble with. But do you think there are any other struggles that new investors in real estate have, or anything that you see frequently?
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you the number one thing I see. I don't have any money. That is the number one thing that people say to me. I don't have any money, and they don't understand that there's ways to creatively work around that.
Mhm.
And it, I don't, without going down the rabbit hole of creative financing, and there's partnering. There's all kinds of ways to work around it. I think that people think that you have to have a bunch of money to be a real estate investor.
Mhm.
And definitely you have to be resourceful. I'm not going to say, like, if you don't have money, you have to look at yourself and see the other resources that you have, whether it's time, whether it's energy, whether it's something that you have that would be valuable for a partnership, but you have to look in and realize what it is that you have and how to leverage that,
Mhm.
right? It's not always about the money, so I think that I think that it's a barrier to entry to a lot of people because they think they have to get the money all on their own and do this all on their own. And it's much harder that way.
Mhm. Got it. Sounds good. So there are some common struggles, it sounds like, but there's also creative ways to look around that. And realistically, it sounds like if someone wants to, they'll figure out how to go from zero to a little bit of something to eventually growing it. So I think it's a really good way to look at it, and great advice for those with, in your eyes, the number one struggle out there. But appreciate the advice there. So you've been involved in a lot of real estate, have been on this amazing journey. One of the things that you started was the Women's Real Estate Network. Can you
Yeah.
speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So the Women's Real Estate Network I started several years ago, and honestly, I started it out of my own need. I was flipping here in LA, and we had some of the big Wall Street money come in and start buying up some of the homes that normally flippers would buy, and so they were outbidding us. So I was losing bids one right after another. And for anybody who's been in this industry, like, you put out bids, you put out bids, you put out bids, you
Red
put out
blocks.
offers, you put out offers. Yeah, like, for you to be constantly getting turned down, it's disheartening. and I was at this kind of, point where I was just like, oh, this is hard, this is disheartening. And I was like, where are my girls? I wanted to surround myself with my girlfriends. And I realized, like, a lot of the stuff that I go to is just primarily men, and I've gotten tons of great education from men. Don't get me wrong. This is not about, male bashing at all. This is just about surrounding myself with other women that are doing it. So I made a brunch one Sunday, and I invited a bunch of full-time women real estate investors to it. And not all of them were flippers. Some of them were investing in notes. There's two women who have like 18 storage units around the country. There's a lot of different venues of real estate investing, and there's a lot of women involved in variety of it. And we had brunch, and we were helping each other. We were like, oh, I have this problem with this tenant. Oh, I've got an attorney that can help you with that. Or I have foundation issue. Oh, I got a concrete guy that might be able to help you. Like, it was a lot of collaboration, a lot of working together. And at the end of the brunch, I was thinking about doing this quarterly, and they were like, no, let's do it every other month. And, people opened up their houses, and there was always wine involved. And then I realized, well, there's a whole group of women out there that don't even know these kick butt women, right? And so maybe I should make a meetup. And I made a meetup, and the next thing you know, I had 12 chapter leaders across the country, and then COVID hit, and then we're online. So currently we're an online organization, and we bring women who have really great business models, and they come and they talk to us on a monthly basis, and we network together, and we share resources, and there's some education involved. So yeah, it's really great. It's a great thing for women who want to get into real estate, who want to feel like there are other women doing what they want to do.
Got it. I think it's a beautiful view of it, and it's awesome that you've been able to experience such growth. Quick follow on regarding that. A lot of times, I think people may go into business and they see it as this super competitive thing where it's really cutthroat and they have to kind of step on everyone to the top. In no way am I not saying that it's not competitive. Everything's kind of a competition, whether it's business or sports. But do you think a lot of times, if you view business as really helping people out, that's ultimately a more sustainable and kind of a better view than just being cutthroat competitive all the time?
I do. That is one of my ideologies. I think it was Zig Ziglar that said, help others get their dreams, and you'll get yours. And I think there's been times when I'm like, really, when am I going to get mine? But but the fact of the matter is, it happens, and it's a great way to give forward.
Got it, for sure. I think, yeah, I definitely, it's something, I'm just starting out here, but definitely something that I've started starting the last few months. So hopefully a lot of fruition for us and for everyone listening out there. But appreciate that, that quote around there. Just taking a few of the last things, you've spoken about your life story and how you really got involved in real estate and how you were able to kind of go from zero to hero and build this empire. In your personal life, what would you say brings you happiness?
Oh, wow. Helping, it's interesting because I've really been thinking about this lately. And it's helping others towards their goals too.
Mhm.
I started a mentoring program recently, helping those get started, overcoming their fears. Like, I think that, I still actually, I didn't finish out this part of the story. So I was drinking the water at drinking the Kool-Aid at Tony Robbins, and then I actually started working for him. So I'm what's called a trainer. There's about, I don't know, 200 of us worldwide. And he flies us out to events or has us online and has us help people make their transitions, in their lives. And I found that really satisfying, like to be part of somebody else's ahas, to be part of somebody else being able to go forward, and he has an ideology that business is 20% mechanics and 80% psychology. And I agree. Whenever I've really had business problems, it's because I had stinking thinking. Totally. And so and being somebody who has a skill set now to help other people get through that has really been satisfying for me. It's been really like, great, and I truly rejoice in other people's successes, and I love being a part of that too. So yeah, I think that's what gives me my business happiness. And of course I've got kids and a family. That gives me my personal happiness.
It's a beautiful end. And I think ultimately what many of us want to be, I've said this on prior shows before, but I like to ask this question towards the end of the shows because usually, people say they chase money or fame or that. I think people just really want to be happy at the end of the day. So I think whatever people's perspective on that is, if you can help people live better lives, that's ultimately.
I think
So,
so, and I think that I've told my kids this. They're especially when they were in university, like they were like, "What should I study? What should I be?" And I'm like, "Study something that you love, that you know that you could dive into for 4 years." Like, like what you should be. You should be somebody who gets up and really loves what you do during the day, because this is what it's about, right? So I say that if there's anybody out there listening that thinks I'm stuck in a situation that I can't get out of, yeah, you can. Get some people around you that are going to, support the dream that you have, and get some education and some networking, and go for it.
awesome. Well, definitely appreciate that advice and that perspective on happiness. And last thing I wanted to ask, you've been able to share, and we're really fortunate to hear a lot of your experiences. Is there anything else or any other parting notes you have, whether it's life advice, relationship advice, business advice, Deborah, or is yours?
Um, mm, I think there's a lot of talk right now, about Brene Brown. I don't know if you are familiar with her.
Not, not,
She's an author,
mhm.
and she studies happiness. She studies what makes people happy, and she has a book, and it talks about this poem, and I forgot who wrote it. It was one of our past presidents, and it talks about the arena. Like, you need to get into the arena, you know, scarred, dirty, play the game, get in, and I think that, considering there was a time when I was laying in a hospital and I didn't know what my life was going to look like, I I think from that point of view, I was like, oh no, I need to, if I'm given a chance, I'm going to live this life full out. Like, and there's fear and there's anxiety and there's what am I doing, and there's helplessness, and you know what, embrace it, go for it, get some other people around you to go to be able to go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this. And they'll go, it's okay, we'll we'll support you, and we'll gather around you, and lessons will be learned, and it'll all be all right. But I think, go for it. That's my that's my Nike's just do it, go for it.
Shoot Dog. Shoot Dog was a great book. Deborah, that was a great parting note. You're an incredible woman, a rock star, a real estate investor. And thanks so much for taking the time to go on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.